Number 5147. There was of all food for Pharaoh. This signifies full of celestial good for the nourishment of the natural, as is evident from the signification of food, namely celestial good, of which presently, and from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the interior natural, and also the natural in general. For when they correspond, the interior and exterior natural make one. And as food is for nourishment, the words, "There was of all food for Pharaoh," signify full of celestial good for the nourishment of the natural. It is said that this food was in the uppermost basket, and this signifies that the inmost of the will part was full of celestial good. For good from the Lord flows in through man's inmost, and thence through degrees as by the steps of a ladder to the exteriors. For the inmost is relatively in the most perfect state, and therefore can receive good immediately from the Lord. But not so the lower. If these were to receive good from the Lord immediately, they would either obscure it or pervert it, for they are relatively less perfect. As regards the influx of celestial good from the Lord and its reception, be it known that man's will part receives good, and his intellectual receives truth, and that the intellectual can by no means receive truth so as to make it its own, unless at the same time the will part receives good, and conversely. For the one flows in this way into the other and disposes it for reception. The things of the intellect may be compared to forms which are continually varying, and the things of the will to the harmonies that result from this variation. Consequently, truths may be compared to variations, and goods to the delights therefrom. And as this is particularly the case with truths and goods, it is evident that the one is impossible without the other, and also that the one cannot be produced except by means of the other. Food signifies celestial good, because the food of the angels is nothing but the goods of love and charity, by which they are not only kept alive, but are also refreshed. These goods in act, or the practice of them, serve especially for the refreshment of the angels, because they are their desires. And it is known that when desires are realized in act, they afford refreshment and life. That such things yield nourishment to the spirit of man, while material food yields nourishment to his body, may also be seen from the fact that food that gives no pleasure conduces but little to nourishment, but food that gives pleasure is nourishing. It is pleasure that opens the passages or ducts which receive the food and conveys it into the blood, whereas the lack of pleasure closes them. With the angels these pleasures are the goods of love and charity, and from this it can be inferred that they are spiritual foods which correspond to earthly foods. As goods are food, so truths are drink. Food is mentioned in many places in the word, and one who is not acquainted with the internal sense must suppose that ordinary food is there meant, whereas it is spiritual food, as in Jeremiah. All the people groan, seeking bread. They have given their desirable things for food, to refresh the soul. In Isaiah, every one that thirsteth, go ye to the waters, and he that hath no silver, go ye buy and eat. Yea, go buy wine and milk without silver and without price. In Joel, the day of Jehovah is near, and as devastation from the thunderer shall it come. Is not the food cut off before our eyes? Gladness and joy from the house of our God? The grains have rotted under their clods. The garners are devastated, the barns are destroyed, because the corn is withered. In David, our garners are full, yielding food after food. Our flocks are thousands and 10,000s in our streets. There is no lamentation in our streets. Blessed is the people that is in such a case. Again, all things wait for thee, that thou mayest give them their food in its time. Thou givest them, they gather. Thou openest thy hand, they are satisfied with good. In these passages, celestial and spiritual food is meant in the internal sense, while material food is meant in the sense of the letter. From this it is plain how the interiors and exteriors of the Word, or the things therein of the Spirit and those of the letter, correspond to each other, so that while man understands these things according to the sense of the letter, the angels with him understand them according to the spiritual sense. The Word has been so written as to serve not only the human race, but also heaven, for which reason all the expressions therein are significative of heavenly things, and all the things are representative of them, and this even to the least jot. That food in the spiritual sense is good, the Lord also plainly teaches in John. Labor not for the food that perisheth, but for the food that endureth unto life eternal, which the Son of Man shall give to you. Again, my flesh is truly food, and my blood is truly drink. Here flesh is the divine good, and blood is the divine truth. And again, Jesus said to his disciples, I have food to eat that ye know not. The disciples said one to another, Hath any man brought him aught to eat? Jesus saith to them, My food is to do the will of him that sent me, and to perfect his work. To do the will of the Father and to perfect his work is the divine good in act or performance, which, as before said, in the true sense, is food. Number 5148. The work of the baker. This signifies according to every use of the sensuous, as is evident from the signification of work, namely, according to every use, of which hereafter, and from the signification of a baker, namely, the sensuous subject to the will part. The reason why work denotes use is that it is predicated of the will part, or of the sensuous subject to the will part. And whatever is done by means of this, and can be called work, must be use. All the works of charity are nothing else, for works of charity are works of the will or uses. Number 5149. And the bird did eat them out of the basket from upon my head. This signifies the falsity from evil that consumed it, as is evident from the signification of a bird, namely, intellectual things and also thoughts. Consequently, the things thence derived, that is, in the true sense, truths of every kind, and in the opposite sense, falsities. And from the signification of eating, namely, consuming. In the original tongue also the word eat means to consume. And from the signification of a basket, namely, the will part. Here evil from the will part, because the basket had holes in it. From this it follows that the bird eating out of the basket from upon the head signifies the falsity from evil that consumed it. Falsity is from two origins, falsity of doctrine and falsity of evil. Falsity of doctrine does not consume goods, for a man may be in falsity of doctrine and yet in good, and therefore men of every doctrine, even Gentiles, may be saved. But the falsity of evil is that which consumes goods. Evil in itself is opposite to good, yet by itself it does not consume goods, but only by means of falsity. For falsity attacks the truths which belong to good, because truths are, as it were, the outworks that encompass good. These outworks are assaulted by means of falsity, and when these are captured, good is given over to destruction. One who does not know that birds signify things of the intellect must suppose that where birds are mentioned in the word, either birds are meant, or else that they are used figuratively, as in ordinary speech. Except from the internal sense, no one can know that birds mean things of the understanding, such as thoughts, ideas, reasonings, principles, consequently truths or falsities. As in Luke, The kingdom of God is like unto a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and cast into his garden. And it grew and became a great tree, so that the birds of the heaven dwelt in the branches of it. The birds of the heaven here denote truths. In Ezekiel, it shall grow up a magnificent cedar, and under it shall dwell every bird of every wing. In the shadow of the branches thereof shall they dwell. Birds of every wing denote truths of every kind. And again, Asher was a cedar in Lebanon. All the birds of the heavens made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches all the beasts of the field brought forth, and in his shadow dwelt all great nations. Birds of the heavens in like manner denote truths. Again, upon his ruin all the birds of the heaven shall dwell, and all the wild animals of the field shall be upon his branches. Here birds of the heavens denote falsities. In Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar saw in a dream, behold, a tree in the midst of the earth. The beast of the field had shadow under it, and the birds of the heaven dwelt in the branches thereof. Here again, birds of the heaven denote falsities. In Jeremiah, I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heaven were fled. No man denotes no good. The birds of the heaven that were fled denotes that truths were dispersed. Again, from the bird of the heavens even to the beast they are fled, they are gone. Here the meaning is similar. And in Matthew, the sower went forth to sow, and some seeds fell upon the hard path, and the birds came and devoured them. Here birds denote reasonings and also falsities. The meaning is similar in many other passages. Number 5150. And Joseph answered and said. This signifies revelation from perception, from the celestial in the natural, as is evident from the signification of answering and saying, namely, revelation from perception, and from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial in the natural. Here, Joseph is the celestial in the natural, because the subject here is the natural. In regard to the celestial and the spiritual, the case is this. The celestial itself and the spiritual itself, which flow into heaven from the divine of the Lord, dwell principally in the interior rational, for there the forms are more perfect and are accommodated to reception. Nevertheless, the celestial and spiritual from the divine of the Lord flow into the exterior rational also, and likewise into the natural, and this both mediately and immediately. Mediately through the interior rational, and immediately from the Lord's very divine. That which flows in immediately disposes, and that which flows in mediately is disposed. This is the case in the exterior rational and in the natural, and hence is evident what is meant by the celestial in the natural. The celestial is from the divine good, and the spiritual is from the divine truth, both of them being from the Lord. And when these are in the rational, they are called the celestial and the spiritual in the rational, and when in the natural, the celestial and spiritual in the natural. By the rational and the natural is meant the man himself, insofar as he is formed to receive the celestial and the spiritual. But by the rational is meant his internal, and by the natural his external. Through influx and according to reception, a man is called celestial or spiritual. Celestial if the Lord's divine good is received in the will part, spiritual if it is received in the intellectual part. Number 5151. This is the interpretation thereof. This signifies what the dream had in it, as is evident from the signification of interpretation as being what it has in it, or the contents. Number 5152. The 3 baskets. This signifies the successive things of the will, as is evident from the signification of 3 baskets, namely, the successive things of the will. Number 5153 are 3 days. This signifies even to the last, as is evident from the signification of 3, namely 1 period and its continuous progression from beginning to end, thus even to the last. Number 5154. Yet within 3 days. This signifies what is in the last, as is evident from what was said just above about the signification of 3. Number 5155. Shall Pharaoh lift off thy head from upon thee? This signifies a conclusion from what is foreseen, as is evident from the signification of lifting off the head, namely, what is provided and therefore concluded, or what is concluded from what is provided. But here from what is foreseen, because the statement follows that the baker should be hanged upon wood, by which is signified rejection and damnation. The reason why a conclusion from what is foreseen, not from what is provided, is signified, is that providence is predicated of good, but foresight of evil. For all good flows in from the Lord, and therefore this is provided. But all evil is from hell, or from man's proprium, which makes one with hell, and therefore this is foreseen. As regards evil, providence is nothing but the direction or determination of evil to less evil, and, as far as possible, to good. But the evil itself is foreseen. In the present instance, foresight is signified because the subject is the sensuous that is subject to the will part, and its rejection on account of evil. Number 5156. And shall hang thee upon wood. This signifies rejection and damnation, as is evident from the signification of being hanged upon wood, namely, rejection and damnation. For hanging upon wood was a curse, and a curse is a rejection from the divine, consequently, damnation. That hanging upon wood was a curse is evident in Moses. If a man have committed a crime worthy of death, and he be put to death, so that thou hangest him upon wood, his carcass shall not remain all night upon the wood, but burying thou shalt bury him the same day. For he that is hanged is the curse of God, that thou defile not the land which Jehovah thy God will give thee for an inheritance. That he should not remain all night upon the wood signified perpetual rejection. For in the evening the day began anew, and therefore unless those who had been hanged were cast away before evening, it would have represented that evil was not rejected, and consequently that the land was not freed from it, but was defiled. And therefore it is added, that thou defile not the land which Jehovah thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. That the hanged remained until evening and no longer may be seen at Numbers. Among the Jewish nation there were 2 main penalties, stoning and hanging. Stoning was on account of falsity, and hanging upon wood was on account of evil. And this because stone is truth, and in the opposite sense falsity, and wood is good, and in the opposite sense evil. And therefore in the prophetic word mention is occasionally made of committing adultery with stone and wood, whereby is signified the perversion of truth, which is falsity, and the adulteration of good, which is evil. Number 5157. And the bird shall eat thy flesh from upon thee. This signifies that falsity of evil will consume what is of these sensuous things, as is evident from the signification of eating, namely consuming, and from the signification of bird, namely falsity, and from the signification of flesh, namely good, and hence in the opposite sense evil. For most of the expressions in the word have also an opposite sense, which is known from their signification in the true sense. and from the signification of from upon thee, namely, from the sensuous things subject to the will part. For these are represented by the baker. That these were evil and therefore to be rejected is evident from what goes before. The truth with regard to this, that the sensuous things subject to the intellectual part represented by the butler were retained, and that the sensuous things subject to the will part represented by the baker were rejected, is a mystery that without elucidation cannot be comprehended. What follows may throw some light upon it. By sensuous things are meant those external knowledges and delights which have been introduced through the 5 external or bodily senses into man's memory and into his desires, and which together constitute the exterior natural, by virtue of which a man is called a sensuous man. These external knowledges are subject to the intellectual part, but the delights are subject to the will part. The external knowledges also bear relation to the truths of the understanding, and the delights to the goods of the will. The former are represented by the butler and were retained, and the latter are represented by the baker and were rejected. The reason why the former were retained is that for a time they could agree with intellectual things, and the reason why the latter were rejected is that they could not possibly agree. For the will part in the Lord, who is the subject here in the supreme internal sense, was divine from conception, and was the divine good itself. But the will part that he had by birth from the mother was evil, and therefore this was to be rejected, and in its place a new one was to be provided from the divine will part by means of the intellectual, or from the divine good by means of the divine truth, thus from his own power. This is the mystery here described in the internal sense. Number 5158, verses 20 to 23. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, on Pharaoh's birthday, and he made a feast to all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the head of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler to his butlership, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph interpreted to them. And the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, signifies at the last, on Pharaoh's birthday, signifies when the natural was being regenerated. And he made a feast to all his servants, signifies initiation and conjunction with the exterior natural. And he lifted up the head, signifies according to what was provided and foreseen, of the chief butler and the chief baker, signifies concerning the sensuous things subject to both parts, the intellectual part and the will part. Among his servants signifies which were among those things in the exterior natural. And he restored the chief butler to his butlership, signifies that the sensuous things of the intellectual part were received and made subordinate. And he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, signifies instrumental to the interior natural. And he hanged the chief baker, signifies that the sensuous things of the will part were rejected. As Joseph interpreted to them, signifies prediction from the celestial and the natural. And the chief butler did not remember Joseph, signifies that there was not as yet complete conjunction with the celestial of the natural, but he forgot him, signifies removal. Number 5159. And it came to pass on the 3rd day. This signifies at the last, as is evident from the signification of the 3rd day, namely, the last of a state, for day means state. And the 3rd is what is complete, thus the last. The last of a state occurs when a previous state comes to an end, and a new one begins. A new state begins in the man who is being regenerated when the order is inverted, as when interior things obtain dominion over exterior things, and the exterior things begin to serve the interior, both as to the intellect and the will. With those who are being regenerated, this is indicated by the fact that something within restrains sensuous delights and bodily or earthly pleasures from prevailing and enlisting the things of the intellect for their confirmation. And when this is the case, the prior state is at its last, and the new state is at its first. Such is the signification of on the third day. With every man, whether being regenerated or not, there occur changes of state and also inversions. But in one way with those who are being regenerated, and in another way with those who are not being regenerated. With those who are not being regenerated, these changes or inversions are due to causes in the body and to causes in civil life. Causes in the body are lusts that come and go with certain times of life, and also considerations of bodily health and long life in the world. Causes in civil life are seeming outward restraints of lusts, chiefly to acquire the reputation of being wise and of loving justice and goodness, but with the end of securing honor and gain. Whereas with those who are being regenerated, the changes or inversions are effected for spiritual reasons, which proceed from goodness and justice itself. And when the man begins to be affected with these, he is at the end of the former state and at the beginning of a new one. But as few can understand this, it shall be illustrated by an example. He who refuses to be regenerated loves bodily things for the sake of the body and for no other end. And he also loves the world for the sake of the world, rising no higher because at heart he denies all that is higher or interior. On the other hand, one who is being regenerated likewise loves bodily things and also the things of the world, but for a higher or more interior end. For he loves the things of the body to the end that he may have a sound mind in a sound body, and he loves his mind and its soundness with an end still more interior, that he may appreciate good and understand truth. Like other men, he too loves the things of the world, but he loves them to the end that worldly wealth, possessions, and honors may be the means of his doing what is good and true, and what is just and fair. This example shows the respective characters of those who are not being regenerated, and of those who are. That in outward form they appear alike, but that in internal form they are wholly unlike. It also shows the causes and the nature of these causes that produce the changes and the inversions of state in both classes of persons. And it can further be seen that in the regenerate, interior things have dominion over exterior things, while in the unregenerate, exterior things have dominion over interior things. In a man it is the ends that have the dominion, for they subordinate and subject to themselves all things in him. His veriest life is from no other source than the end, because the end is always his love. Number 5160. On Pharaoh's birthday. This signifies when the natural was being regenerated, as is evident from the signification of being born, namely regeneration, of which hereafter, and from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the interior natural, here the natural in general, because with the regenerate the interior and the exterior natural act as one by their mutual correspondence. To be born is to be regenerated, because spiritual things are to be understood in the internal sense, and spiritual birth is regeneration, which is also called rebirth. And therefore, when birth is spoken of in the word, no other birth is understood in heaven than that effected by water and the Spirit, that is, by faith and charity, because it is by being born again, or regenerated, that man becomes man, and is completely distinguished from the brutes. For he then becomes a son and heir of the Lord's kingdom. That spiritual births are signified by the births mentioned in the word may be seen above. Number 5161. And he made a feast to all his servants. This signifies initiation and conjunction with the exterior natural, as is evident from the signification of a feast, namely initiation to conjunction, and also conjunction through love and appropriation, and from the signification of servants, namely the things of the exterior natural. For when man is being regenerated, lower things are subordinated and subjected to higher, or exterior things to interior, the exterior things then becoming servants and the interior masters. Such is the signification of servants in the word. But they become such servants as are loved by the Lord, for it is mutual love that conjoins them and causes their service, not to be felt as such, but as compliance from the heart. For good flows in from within and produces this delight. In old time, feasts were held for various reasons, and they signified initiation into mutual love, and thus conjunction. They were also held on birthdays, and then represented the new birth, or regeneration, which is the conjunction of the interiors with the exteriors in man through love, consequently the conjunction in him of heaven with the world. For what is worldly or natural in man is then conjoined with what is spiritual and celestial. Number 5162. And he lifted up the head. This signifies according to what is provided and foreseen, as is evident from the signification of lifting up his head, namely what is concluded from what is provided, and also from what is foreseen. This was provided in respect to the sensuous subject to the intellectual part, and retained as good, which is represented by the butler. And it was foreseen in respect to the sensuous subject to the will part, and rejected as evil, which is represented by the baker. For good is provided, and evil is foreseen, because all good is from the Lord, and all evil is from hell, or from man's proprium. That man's proprium is nothing but evil may be seen above. Number 5163. Of the chief butler and the chief baker. This signifies concerning the sensuous things subject to both parts, the intellectual part and the will part, as is evident from the representation of the butler, namely the sensuous subject to the intellectual part, and from the representation of the baker, namely the sensuous subject to the will part. Number 5164. Among his servants. This signifies that were among the things in the exterior natural, as is evident from the signification of in the midst, namely among them, and from the signification of servants, namely the things in the exterior natural. In the word, all things are called servants that are beneath, and are therefore subordinate and subject to what is above, as the things of the exterior natural, or the sensuous things therein, in respect to the interior natural. And the things of the interior natural also are called servants in respect to the rational. And consequently all things in man, both in general and in particular, and equally so, whether inmost or outmost, are called servants relatively to the divine, for this is supreme. The servants here, among whom Pharaoh the king executed judgment upon the butler and the baker, were the princes and grandees of the palace. And the reason why these, like other subjects of every condition, are called servants of the king, as is also the case in every kingdom at this day, is that royalty represents the Lord as to divine truth, in respect to whom all are alike servants, whatever their condition may be. And in the Lord's kingdom of heaven, the greatest, that is, the inmost, are servants more fully than others, because they are the most obedient, and in deeper humiliation than the rest. For these are meant by the least that shall be greatest, and by the last that shall be first. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. He that is least among you, the same shall be great. And also by the great who should be ministers, and by the first who should be servants. Whosoever would be great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever would be first of you shall be servant of all. They are called servants relatively to the divine truth which is from the Lord, and ministers relatively to the divine good which is from him. The reason why the last who are first are servants more fully than others is that they know, acknowledge, and perceive that everything of life, and consequently everything of power which they have, is from the Lord, and not at all from themselves. Whereas they who do not perceive this, because they do not acknowledge it, are also servants, yet more by the confession of the lips than of the heart. But those of a contrary nature call themselves servants relatively to the divine, and yet desire to be masters. For they are indignant and angry if the divine does not favor them, and as it were obey them. And at last they oppose the divine, and take away all power from the divine, and attribute everything to themselves. There are very many of this character within the Church who deny the Lord, and say they acknowledge one Supreme Being. Number 5165. And he restored the chief butler to his butlership. This signifies that the sensuous things of the intellectual part were received and made subordinate, as is evident from the representation of the chief butler, namely, the sensuous things in general subject to the intellectual part, see above. And from the signification of restoring to his butlership, namely, reducing to order under the intellectual. That to restore to an office is to reduce to order in the last place may be seen in number 5125. The word here used is butlership, because butlership and things relating thereto, such as wine, new wine, strong drink, and water, are predicated of whatever belongs to the understanding, as also are drinking and giving to drink. Hence it is plain that restoring the chief butler to his butlership signifies reducing to order the sensuous things of the intellectual part, and thus receiving them and making them subordinate. These sensuous things are received and made subordinate when they minister and serve as means to interior things, both for bringing forth into act and for seeing inwardly. For man sees interior things in the sensuous things of the exterior natural, almost as he sees affections in the face, and those still more interior in the eyes. Without such an interior face or plane, a man in the body cannot think at all of what is above sensuous things, for he sees what is above as one sees the affections and thoughts of another in his face, while not paying special attention to the face itself. And as one hears another speak, not attending to the words, but to the sense of what is said, the very speech being the plane where that sense resides. It is similar with the exterior natural. Unless this served interior things as a plane in which they see themselves as in a mirror, man could not think at all, and therefore this plane is formed first, even from infancy. But these matters are unknown, because what takes place interiorly in man is not seen except by interior reflection. The nature of the exterior natural is very evident in the other life, for the faces of spirits and angels are formed from it and according to it. In the light of heaven, the interior things, especially the intentions or ends, shine forth through the face. If love to the Lord and charity to the neighbor have formed the interior things, there is a consequent resplendence in the face, and the face itself is love and charity in form. But if the love of self and of the world, and the derivative hatred, revenge, cruelty, and the like, have formed the interior things, there is a consequent diabolical expression in the face, and the face itself is hatred, revenge, and cruelty in form. This shows the nature and use of the exterior natural, and also what it is when subject to interior things, and what it is when interior things are subject to it. Number 5166. And he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. This signifies instrumental to the interior natural, as is evident from what has been said above, where similar words occur. Number 5167. And he hanged the chief baker. This signifies that the sensuous things of the will part were rejected, as is also evident from what has been explained above, where similar words are used. Number 5168. As Joseph interpreted to them. This signifies prediction from the celestial and the natural, as is evident from the signification of interpreting, namely, saying what the dream has in it, or what is within it, and also what would happen, thus to predict, and from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial and the natural. How it was that the sensuous things of the intellectual part were retained, and those of the will part rejected, may be seen above. In the internal sense of this chapter, the subject is the subordination of the exterior natural, which is to be made subordinate in order that it may serve the interior natural as a plane. For unless it is made subordinate, interior truths and goods, and consequently interior thoughts which have in them what is spiritual and celestial, have nothing in which they can be represented. For they are presented in the exterior natural as in their face, or as in a mirror. And therefore, when there is no subordination, the man can have no interior thought. Nay, he cannot have any faith. For there is no comprehension, whether remote or exalted, and therefore no perception of such things. The only thing that can make the natural subordinate and reduce it to correspondence is the good, in which there is innocence. In the word, this good is called charity. Sensuous things and external knowledges are only the means into which this good can flow, present itself in form, and unfold itself for every use. But without this good in them, external knowledges, even if the very truths of faith, are nothing but scales among filth, which fall off. But how through good, by means of external knowledges and truths of faith, exterior things are reduced to order and to correspondence with interior things, is at this day further from apprehension than it was formerly. And this for several reasons, the chief being that at this day there is no longer charity within the Church. For it is the last time of the Church, and therefore there is no desire to know such things. For this reason a kind of aversion at once shows itself at the mention of anything within or above sensuous things, and consequently when anything of angelic wisdom is set forth. But as such things are contained in the internal sense, for the contents of this sense are adapted to angelic wisdom, and as the word is now being explained in its internal sense, they must be stated, however remote they may appear from what is sensuous. Number 5169. And the chief butler did not remember Joseph. This signifies that there was not as yet complete conjunction with the celestial of the natural, as is evident from the signification of remembering Joseph, namely the reception of faith, and consequently conjunction, because conjunction is effected by means of faith. Here, therefore, not remembering means that there was not as yet complete conjunction. And from the representation of the chief butler, namely the sensuous of the intellectual part, and from the representation of Joseph, namely the celestial of the natural. See above. Number 5170. And he forgot him. This signifies removal, as is evident from the signification of forgetting, namely removal, since not remembering is non-conjunction. For it is according to non-conjunction that removal takes place. What is forgotten is also removed. And such also is the case with the sensuous things subject to the intellectual part. For those which are retained are not therefore conjoined, for they are not yet free from fallacies. But as soon as they are purified, they are conjoined. Of this, however, more will be said in the following chapter, where the butler is said to have remembered Joseph. Continuation concerning the correspondence with the grand man. Here concerning the correspondence therewith of the interior viscera. Number 5171. To what provinces angelic communities belong may be known in the other life from their situation relatively to the human body, and also from their operation and influx. For they flow into and operate upon that organ or member in which they are. But their influx and operation can be perceived only by those who are in the other life, and not by man unless his interiors are open to that extent, nor even then unless the Lord gives him a sensitive reflection joined with perception. Number 5172. There are certain upright spirits who think without reflection, and who therefore rapidly and as it were without premeditation utter whatever occurs to their thought. They have an interior perception which does not become so visual by means of reflection and thought, as is the case with others. For in the course of their lives they have been as it were self-instructed about the goodness of things, but not so much so about their truth. I have been told that such persons belong to the province of the thymus gland. For the thymus is a gland especially serviceable to infants, and during infancy is soft. In such spirits likewise there remains a soft infantile quality, into which flows the perception of good, and from this perception truth shines forth in a general manner. These spirits can be in great turmoils without being disturbed, as is also the case with the gland in question. Number 5173. In the other life there are very many methods of agitation, and also very many methods of initiation into gyres. In the body the purifying of the blood, as well as of the serum or lymph, and also of the chyle, represents these agitations, which are effected also by various corrections. And the subsequent introduction into use of these fluids represents the initiation into gyres. It is a very common thing in the other life for spirits, after undergoing agitation, to be brought into a tranquil and delightful state, and thus into the communities into which they are to be initiated, and to which they are to belong. That the correction and purifying of the blood, serum, and chyle, and of the food in the stomach, correspond to such things in the spiritual world, cannot but seem strange to those who in natural things think only of what is natural, and especially to those who believe in nothing else, thus denying that there is or can be anything spiritual that acts and rules within natural things. Yet the truth is that in each and all of the things in nature and her three kingdoms, there is an inward active force from the spiritual world. And unless this were so, nothing whatever in the natural world could act as cause and effect, and consequently nothing could be produced. That which is within natural things from the spiritual world is called a force implanted from the first creation, whereas it is an endeavor on the cessation of which action or motion ceases. Hence it is that the universal visible world is a theatre representative of the spiritual world. The case herein is like that of the motion of the muscles from which comes action. Unless there were in this motion an endeavor from man's thought and will, it would cease in a moment. For it is according to laws known in the learned world that when endeavour ceases, motion ceases, and also that all determination is in endeavour, and that in motion there is nothing real except endeavour. It is clear that this force or endeavour in action or motion is the spiritual in the natural. For to think and will is spiritual, and to act and be moved is natural. Those who never think beyond nature have no conception of this, and yet they cannot deny it. Nevertheless, that in the will and thence in the thought which produces is not alike in form to the action that is produced, for the action merely represents that which the mind wills and thinks. Number 5174. It is known that the food in the stomach is agitated in many ways, in order that its inner elements may be extracted and may serve for use, that is, may pass into chyle and then into blood, and that it is further agitated in the intestines. Such agitations are represented by the first agitation of spirits, which all take place according to their life in the world, in order that evils may be separated and goods brought together to serve for use. And therefore it may be said of souls or spirits that shortly after death or release from the body, they come first as it were into the region of the stomach, and are there agitated and purified. They in whom evils have obtained the ascendancy, after being agitated with no good result, are conveyed through the stomach into the intestines, even to the last, namely the colon and rectum, and thence are cast forth into the privy, that is, into hell. But they in whom goods have had the ascendancy, after some agitations and purifications become chyle, and pass into the blood, some by a longer and some by a shorter way, some being agitated severely, some gently, and some scarcely at all. These last are represented by the food juices, which are at once imbibed by the veins and carried into the circulation, even into the brain, and so on. Number 5175. For when a man dies and enters the other life, his life resembles food, which is softly taken hold of by the lips and is then passed through the mouth, throat, and esophagus into the stomach, and this according to the nature contracted in the life of the body by various activities. At first most spirits are treated gently, being kept in the company of angels and good spirits, and this is represented by the food being first touched softly by the lips, and then tasted by the tongue to discover its quality. Food that is soft and contains what is sweet, oily, and spirituous is at once absorbed by the veins and carried into circulation. But food that is hard and contains what is bitter, disagreeable, and but little nutritious is reduced with more difficulty, being let down through the esophagus into the stomach, where it is corrected in various ways and windings. And food that is still harder, more disagreeable, and innutritious is thrust down into the intestines, and at last into the rectum, where first is hell. And finally it is cast out and becomes excrement. It is similar with the life of man after death. He is at first kept in externals, and because he had externally led a civil and moral life, he is with angels and upright spirits. But after external things are taken away from him, there is revealed the inner nature of his thoughts and affections, and finally of his ends, and his life remains according to these last. Number 5176. So long as spirits are in the state resembling food in the stomach, so long they are not in the grand man, but are being introduced into it. But when they are representatively in the blood, than they are in the grand man. Number 5177. Those who have been very solicitous about the future, and especially those who have therefore become grasping and avaricious, appear in the region of the stomach. Many have appeared to me there. The sphere of their life may be compared to a sickening smell exhaled from the stomach, and also to heaviness consequent upon indigestion. Those of this character stay long in this region, because solicitude about the future, when confirmed by act, greatly dulls and retards the influx of spiritual life. For they arrogate to themselves what belongs to divine providence, and they who do this obstruct the influx and deprive themselves of the life of good and truth. Number 5178. As solicitude about the future produces anxieties in man, and as such spirits appear in the region of the stomach, therefore anxieties affect the stomach more than the other viscera. I have also been allowed to perceive how these anxieties are increased and diminished by the presence and removal of the spirits referred to. Some anxieties were perceived interiorly, some more exteriorly, some more above and some more below, according to the difference of such solicitude as regards origin, derivation, and direction. It is for this reason also that when such anxieties obsess the mind, the region about the stomach is constricted, and at times pain is felt there, and anxieties also seem to rise up thence. And hence also it is that when man is no longer solicitous about the future, or when everything turns out well for him, so that he no longer is apprehensive of any misfortune, the region about the stomach is relieved and expands, and he feels glad. Number 5179. I once observed an anxious feeling in the lower part of the stomach, from which it was evident to me that such spirits were present. I spoke with them and told them to go away, because their sphere induced anxiety, and did not agree with the spheres of the spirits who were with me. I then discoursed with them about spheres, saying that there are very many spiritual spheres about man, and that men neither know nor wish to know that such is the case, because they deny everything that is called spiritual, and some deny whatever cannot be seen and touched. Thus that certain spheres from the spiritual world encompass man in agreement with his life, and that by means of them man is in company with spirits of similar affection, and that many things take place thereby which the man who attributes all things to nature either denies or ascribes to a more occult nature, as for example to fortune. For by their experience some persons are fully persuaded that something called fortune is secretly at work, but they know not its source. That this hidden something is from a spiritual sphere, and is the ultimate of providence, will of the Lord's divine mercy be shown elsewhere, from what has been attested by experience. Number 5180. There are genii and spirits who induce upon the head a kind of suction or drawing, in such a way as to cause pain in the part affected. I noticed a distinct feeling of suction, as if a membrane were being very sensibly sucked up. I doubt whether others could have borne this on account of the pain, but having become accustomed to it, I have at last often borne it without pain. The chief place of the suction was on the top of the head, and from there it spread towards the region of the left ear and also of the left eye. That which spread towards the eye was from spirits, and that which spread towards the ear was from genii. Both of these belong to the province of the receptacle and ducts of the chyle, whither also the chyle is drawn from all quarters, although at the same time it is driven forth. There were also others who acted within the head in almost the same way, but not with so great a force of suction. I was told that these are they to whom the subtle chyle corresponds, which is brought towards the brain and there mingled with new animal spirit, in order that it may be sent down towards the heart. They who acted outwardly were first seen by me in front, a little to the left, and afterwards in a higher position there, so that their region was observed to be from the plane of the septum of the nose, rising toward the plane of the left ear. They who constitute this province are of two kinds, some being fairly modest, while others are impudent. The modest are they who have desired to know men's thoughts for the purpose of alluring and binding them to themselves. For one who knows another's thoughts knows also his secret and inner things, and this effects conjunction, the end being social intercourse and friendship. These desire to know only what is good in men, examining this and putting a good interpretation on everything else. But the impudent desire and endeavor in many ways to find out the thoughts of others, with a view either of making capital of them or of doing harm. And because this is their desire and endeavor, they keep the person's mind fixed on the thing they want to know, never giving way, yielding an affectionate assent, and thus drawing out even the secret thoughts. In the other life they act in a similar manner, in the communities there, and still more artfully. For there they do not allow the other to wander from his idea, but kindle it into activity, and thus lure it forth. By this means they afterwards keep the others as it were in bonds, and under their control, being privy to their evils. But these spirits are among the wandering spirits, and are often chastised. Number 5181. From the gyres above mentioned, it may to some extent be known to what province in the grand man, and correspondentially in the body, spirits and angels belong. The gyres of those who belong to the province of the lymphatics are slight and rapid, like gently flowing water, so that scarcely any gyrating can be perceived. They who belong to the lymphatics are afterwards conveyed into places which, they said, have reference to the mesentery, and where I was told that there are as it were labyrinths, and that they are afterwards taken away to various places in the grand man to serve for use, as is done with the chyle in the body. Number 5182. There are gyres into which newly arrived spirits have to be initiated, that they may be in the company of others, and speak and think with them. In the other life there must be a concord and unanimity of all, in order that they may be one, as is the case with each and all things in man, which, though everywhere various, yet make one by their common accord. It is similar in the grand man, and to this end the thought and speech of one must be in accord with those of others. It is a fundamental necessity that thought and speech should accord in every member of a community. Otherwise a discordance like a disagreeable grating noise is perceived, which strikes harshly on the minds of the others. Moreover, everything discordant tends to disunite, and is impure, and must be rejected. This impurity arising from discord is represented by the impurity with and in the blood, from which it needs to be cleansed. This cleansing is effected by means of agitations, which are nothing but temptations of various kinds, and afterwards by means of induction into gyres. The first induction into gyres takes place in order that the spirits may be adapted to one another. The second is in order that thought and speech may be in accord. The third, that the spirits may agree together in thought and affection. And the fourth, that they may agree in truth and good. Number 5183. It has been granted me to observe the gyres of those who belong to the province of the liver, and this for the space of an hour. The gyres were gentle, flowing about variously in accordance with the working of this viscus, and they affected me with much delight. Their working is diverse, but is usually orbicular. This diversity of working is represented also in the functions of the liver, which are diverse. For the liver draws in blood and separates it, pouring the better part into the veins, sending away that of a middle quality into the hepatic duct, and leaving the viler part for the gallbladder. This is the case in adults, but in embryos the liver receives the blood from the womb of the mother, and purifies it, introducing the purer part into the veins, that it may flow into the heart by a shorter way, thus acting as a guard before the heart. Number 5184. They who belong to the pancreas act in a sharper way, and as it were in a sawing manner, and with a noise like that of sawing, which is audible to spirits, but not to man unless he is in the spirit while still in the body. Their region is between that of the spleen and that of the liver, more to the left. Those who are in the province of the spleen are almost directly over the head, but they operate upon the organ in question. Number 5185. There are spirits who have reference to the pancreatic, hepatic, and cystic ducts, and consequently to the secretions in them which the intestines cast out. These spirits are of different kinds, but act in consort according to the state of those upon whom they operate. They are generally present at chastisements and punishments which they desire to direct. The worst of them are so stubborn that they will not desist unless deterred by fears and threats, for they dread suffering and then promise anything. They are those who in the life of the body have clung tenaciously to their opinions, not so much from an evil life as from natural depravity. In their natural state they think nothing. To think nothing is to think obscurely of many things at the same time, and not distinctly of anything. Their delight is to chastise, and in this way to do good. Nor do they abstain from things unclean. Number 5186. They who constitute the province of the gallbladder are at the back. They are those who in the life of the body have despised probity, and in a certain way piety, and also those who have brought these things into disrepute. Number 5187. A certain spirit came to me, inquiring whether I knew where he would stay, and when, thinking him well disposed, I told him that possibly he might stay where he was, there came agitating spirits of this province who harassed him terribly. I was sorry for this, and in vain desired to prevent it. I then noticed that I was in the province of the gallbladder. The agitating spirits were of those who despise probity and piety. It was granted me to observe one kind of agitation there, that consists in forcing one to speak faster than he can think. This they effected by abstracting speech from thought, and then forcing the spirit to follow their speech, which it is painful to do. By means of such agitation the slow are initiated into a quicker mode of thinking and speaking. Number 5188. There are some in the world who act by artifices and lies, whence come evils. Their character was shown me, and also the manner in which they act, how they employ the harmless as the means of persuading others, and also how they give them the false appearance of having said so and so, when they have said nothing of the kind. In a word, they use evil means to arrive at their end, whatever it may be, even such means as deceits, lies, and artifices. Such spirits have reference to the morbid growths called tubercles, which usually occur on the pleura and other membranes, and wherever these take firm hold they spread their poison widely, until at last they bring decay upon the whole membrane. Such spirits are severely punished, but their punishment is different from that of others, being affected by whirling. For they are whirled round from left to right like a rotating body which at first is a plane, but which in whirling round swells out. Afterwards the swelling seems to be pressed in and hollowed out, whereupon the speed is increased. And wonderful to say, this swelling imitates the form of such tumors or abscesses. It was observed that while being whirled, they tried to draw others, for the most part the guiltless, into their eddy, and so to destruction. Thus that they did not care whom they drew to perdition, so long as they gave them the impression that they were perishing. It was also observed that they have very keen sight, seeing as it were instantly, and thereby seizing as means whatever is favourable, thus that they are sharper than others. They may also be called deadly ulcers, wherever in the cavity of the breast these may be, whether in the pleura, the pericardium, the mediastinum, or the lungs. It was shown that after punishment such spirits are sent to the back into the abyss, and that they lie there with the face and belly downwards, having but little human life, and losing thereby the sharp-sightedness of their brutish life. Their hell is in a deep place under the right foot, somewhere in front. Number 5189. There came some spirits in front, and before their coming I noticed a sphere of evil, from which I supposed that evil spirits were approaching. But they were the enemies of evil spirits, as I learned from the aggressive and hostile feeling which they inspired against them. When they arrived, they placed themselves above my head, and spoke with me, saying that they were men. I answered that they were not men endowed with a body such as men in the world have, who are wont to call themselves men from the form of the body, but that nevertheless they were men, because the spirit of man is truly the man. This seemed to excite no dissent, for they confirmed it. They said further that they were unlike one another, and because it seemed impossible to me that there could be a community in the other life of those who are unlike, I discussed it with them, saying that if a common cause impelled them to unity, they could be associated, because they would thus all have one end. They said that their nature was such that each one speaks differently from the others, and yet they all think alike. This they also illustrated by examples, whereby it appeared that the perception of all was the same, but that their speech was diverse. They then applied themselves to my left ear, and said that they were good spirits, and that it was their custom so to speak. It was said of them that they come in a body, and that no one knows where they come from. I perceived the sphere of evil spirits to be exceedingly hostile to them, for evil spirits are the subjects whom they agitate. Their society, which is a wandering one, was represented by a man and a woman in a chamber, clothed with a garment that was turned into a robe of an azure colour. I perceived that they have reference to the isthmus in the brain, which is between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, through which fibres pass and thence spread in various directions, and in every direction operate diversely in externals. Also that they have reference to the ganglia in the body, into which a nerve runs and then is divided into a number of fibres, some of which run one way and some another, their action being dissimilar in ultimates, although from one origin. Thus in ultimates they are dissimilar in appearance, but similar in end. Moreover, it is known that one force acting in the extremities can produce various effects, and this according to the form there. Ends also are represented by the origins, such as they are in the brain, from which proceed the fibres. The thoughts from these ends are represented by the fibres from those origins, and the actions thence resulting by the nerves which are composed of fibres.